Barbara, thank you so much. The honor is all mine. Let me start, Barbara, by acknowledging the traditional lands here in Toronto, where I come to you from. And here, the lands around Toronto are the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Barbara, the honor truly is mine, because when you first asked me to come and speak, I shared with you that I'm very conscious that for too long, men have occupied spaces that they ought not to occupy. And I really didn't want to do that. And I shared with you how many fantastic women at ICMM could absolutely share with you our commitment on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I loved what you said to me in return, Barbara. You said to me, actually, building truly diverse, inclusive, and equitable cultures will not happen without male allies. Now, Barbara, I firmly believe that an ally is a word you should never use to describe yourself. So I will not call myself an ally. That is for others to decide. What I will certainly do is try and explain my own personal commitment, but certainly the commitment of ICMM to building a truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive industry, and to have a positive impact on the rest of the world. Now, Barbara, as we heard earlier today from brilliant speakers, and particularly from Deanna, who really laid out for us the challenge that we as an industry face in achieving true diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to pause today at this moment, literally 20 years, almost to the day that ICMM was established, with a mandate to help the industry meet society's expectations of us. And it is really, Barbara, unlike this wonderful event, our moment today is not one of celebration, it is one of reflection. It is one of reflection because although we can take a huge amount of energy from the progress we've really made on a number of critical issues, I think here of climate action, of the preservation of nature, of skills development, and many other areas, there is so much work still to be done to achieve a truly safe, just, and sustainable world. And nowhere is that challenge greater than when we look at the challenges when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, we heard Deanna tell us about the statistics around women's participation in the mining industry. And of course, Marshila spoke about her experience of 11,000 out of 450,000 workers. Now, I think the story actually goes further, and I want to put these numbers out there because they are the inspiration for the work that we aim to do here. So in addition to the fact that women are vastly underrepresented in the industry, it's also important to acknowledge that the outcomes for women are also vastly different. So using data from the UK, for example, the median pay gap in the UK in the mining sector is 25%. It's the highest, second only to construction at 27%. In addition, when we look around executive tables, only 13% of C-suite roles are filled by women, and only 3% of CEOs in the industry are women. Now, I can tell you this from personal experience, because when we gather as ICMM, which is made up of the CEOs of the 26 largest mining companies in the world, we only have one woman on that table. And that is a source of deep discomfort for me. It's a source of deep discomfort for others in that room. And I really can't wait for that to change. Now, Barbara, I would really strongly say that although I'm sure many, many people here in this virtual room, but also outside, would certainly absolutely say that they are entirely committed to the values, to the hope, to the vision that we've heard and expressed today. But really on this issue, but on a range of other issues, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. And unless we actually walk the walk, as Deanna has encouraged us to do, the outcomes will not change substantially. So I'm very proud to share with you today the steps that we are taking as an industry to improve the outcomes on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the first time I'm speaking about it publicly, and it is something that's really, really critically important to us. And I will do something that I hope will not bore you, but it is something that's really important. I'm actually going to read for you the additional words that we have inserted into the mining principles that now become a condition of membership for all our companies. And as you said, Barbara, this is something we hope will certainly be implemented in full by the ICMM member companies, but will be adopted by companies across the industry. And these are our mining principles that we have had since our inception, but which we constantly update to improve performance and to raise standards. So let me really read for you the exact words that from today's date on become requirements for every ICMM member company to implement to ensure that we are achieving greater levels of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you, all of this is on the website, but just for people to know. So we have a mining principle, which is principle number 3, which says that ICMM company members commit to respect human rights and the interests, cultures, customs, and values of employees and communities affected by our activities. As with all other mining principles, they break down into more specific expectations. And earlier, prior to today, 3.8 said, implement policies and practices to respect the rights and interests of women. And that is where it stopped. From today onwards, it will have the following additional words that reflect gender-informed approaches to work practices and job design, and that protect against all forms of discrimination and harassment and behaviors that adversely impact on women's successful participation in the workplace. Now, what does that mean in practice? What would we expect to see from companies in order to achieve this higher commitment that we are making today? Well, we would expect to see things like a gender equality strategy. We would expect to see mechanisms to redress gender pay inequalities and gaps. We would expect to see mechanisms that take the caring responsibilities of all workers into account. And of course, we know that caring responsibilities are borne often by women. We would expect to see mechanisms to monitor and address sex-based harassment and bullying in a confidential, independent, and appropriately sensitive manner. And we would expect to see mechanisms to evaluate and address gendered and hypermasculine behaviors, including appropriate gender-based awareness, training, and education. That is one change that we are making to our mining principles today to help achieve a higher performance in our own industry. I want to flag just one more, and there are others for people to read in your own time. We are adding an entirely new performance expectation that didn't exist before, and it has the following expectation. Implement policies and practices to respect the rights and interests of all workers and improve workforce representation in the workplace so it is more inclusive. Again, what would we expect to see here? We would expect to see a DE&I strategy. We would expect to see standards, procedures, and programs or agreements governing employment and compensation, which are based on objective criteria and are not discriminatory. We would expect to see mechanisms to create flexible and appropriate job design and work practices that recognize the differing needs of diverse employees and contractors. And we would expect to see mechanisms to monitor and address diversity-based harassment and bullying in a confidential, independent, and appropriately sensitive manner. Putting these words on paper will not fix the issues, but they are a start because they become the expectations that we set for ourselves and the expectations by which our stakeholders can hold us to account. In addition, Barbara, this all applies to the way that our mining companies manage people that work for us. In addition, we've made a series of other changes to the mining principles that relate to our procurement practices, that relate to community engagement, and that relate to stakeholder engagement. In addition, and this again reflects something Deanna said, we have elevated in our mining principles the concern around psychological safety to the same level as physical safety. We know that the mining industry has a strong culture of physical safety, yet we have more ways to go to get to a place of zero harm. But we think that psychological safety deserves an at least equal representation to physical safety to make sure that we absolutely make progress on these areas too. So Barbara, I will end there to say that I'm really grateful and really pleased to be part of this really most important occasion. And I mark this day today, of course, not only as the first International Day of Women in Mining, but certainly as the day that we have recalibrated and reset as an industry our approach to achieving truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. Thank you so much for having me.